Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's January 10th, 2020. Happy New Year. We are super excited to be kicking off Mormon Stories for a new year. We just interviewed Joe Tippett a couple days ago. Hope you enjoyed that episode. And today we've got an amazing episode. Today we're going to be interviewing the Witbeck family. So a couple years ago, I'm guessing I started to get to know Keri Witbeck and Dave Witbeck. Actually, it was a year ago. And they're an amazing family. And one of the most requested topics or subjects that we get on Mormon Stories Podcast is to just interview normal families. And that's impossible because every family is different and dysfunctional or healthy in its own different ways. So there's no such thing as a normal family. But, you know, we're going to be interviewing just lots of families in 2020 that try to represent the spectrum of the types of families we have in Mormonism. And the Witbeck family is an amazing family. Not necessarily celebrities, but just super high quality people. And we hope that this is the type of stuff our listeners want. We are live streaming today, so we're very excited to have any of you who are able to join us live on Facebook Live. But today, just to give you a heads up or a sense for kind of what we're going to be doing, we have Keri and Dave Witbeck in studio, and then we have their daughter, Alyssa. So just like last year, we kind of kicked off last year with Cody and Leah Young, along with Brinley, doing kind of the parent-child combination. We're doing that again because that Young episode is definitely one of the most powerful and impactful Mormon Stories interviews of all time. And so we're going to be doing more of that as well, trying to get more families interviewed and then also bring in teenagers or children or young adult perspectives as well. So we've got Dave, Keri, and Alyssa in the house. The types of themes that we're going to be covering today span a lot of really important topics that I know are going to be relevant. So we're going to be talking about, growing up in the church. We're going to be touching on themes of growing up in particularly orthodox or conservative homes. That's going to be a major theme. We're going to be talking about parent-child dynamics and particularly just like having teenagers and how that can be very stressful and hard, or young adults, but also trying to navigate a faith crisis as parents when you've got kids who are still believing. That's a really important element that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the themes of perfectionism. There are maybe one or two members of this family that at times have had proclivities towards precision or perfectionism, so we'll be talking about that. We will be talking about marriage, and particularly sort of this idea of getting married young right after a mission and the complexities of young marriage. And then we're going to be talking about a very serious topic, which is spousal abuse. So for those of you who might be triggered by that or need to practice self-care or filtering, please just know we will at some point be talking about spousal abuse along with divorce and ecclesiastical abuse, sometimes how the priesthood in a scenario of let's just say poor mental health or unhealthy behaviors, sort of combining unhealthy behaviors in a new marriage with the priesthood can be deeply problematic and damaging and harmful for people. We're going to be talking about depression and eating disorders as well. And, of course, just navigating a faith crisis as parents with kids who are believers, but then also just as an entire family. And then we'll end by doing something that we're just going to start doing in 2020. I've put together a series of, let's just say, 15 questions. I'm calling them the Thrive questions, but just sort of a tight set of questions that deal specifically with how people navigate their faith transition and how they move from Orthodox Mormons to post-Mormons in a scenario where healing and growth are paramount. So we're going to end in a very, very constructive way after covering some sensitive and deep topics. We'll end by really focusing on healing and growth, and how this wonderful family, I would say, is maybe healthier than ever and happier than ever, even though they've been through a lot.
Yeah.
Is that a stretch?
No.
That's true.
So stay tuned and fasten your seatbelts, Mormon Stories listeners, because it's going to be a great day. Now, I have to pause and just say another super exciting thing about this interview is that it's the first interview in our new studio. So we now that's not totally true. When we interviewed Joe Tippett, we interviewed in this room or in this building, but we have thanks to the support of generous donors, we have built out a new podcast interview studio. When I interviewed Wayne Sermon, he made an interesting observation. He's like, "Hey, John, I'd be more comfortable if we did an interview where we're sitting at a table and we have microphones in front of us instead of like trying to sit at couches or on cushy chairs or whatever." And as we looked around and as I looked at other podcasts like Joe Rogan or whatever, and as I consulted with Cody and Tyler, two of my production engineers or supports, we decided that in this new Thrive studio that we were able to move into thanks to the generosity of Clint and Jenny Martin, we wanted to go ahead and get some high-quality microphones that are more podcast-like, build out just a one-stop shop production studio where we're all sitting at tables, sitting in front of these really high-quality microphones. So we don't know if the sound will be different for those of you who just listen. It seems about 60% of you just listen through audio. Hopefully the sound will be better than ever because we've got great mics. But also for those of you who are watching us on Facebook Live or on YouTube or Facebook later, you'll notice kind of a change in our setup where we've got these beautiful lights, beautiful microphones. We're all sitting at a desk kind of across from each other, and we're excited for this new format. So I just had to mention it because I'm a podcast nerd a little bit. So Happy New Year! Buckle your seatbelts. We're going to have an amazing interview today, and this is going to be one of those multi-hour, as if there's any other type of Mormon Stories interviews. This is going to be one of those multi-hour interviews, so all the long form that you like. So welcome, Keri, Dave, and Alyssa Witbeck to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
We're honored.
Anything you guys want to correct about my intro or add to? Or
That was pretty accurate.
Yeah?
That's good.
Sounds good.
Yeah, Dave?
We're good.
Okay. All right. So let's begin. And I think it probably makes sense to start with who's the oldest. Is that Dave?
That would be me.
All right, Dave. And I kind of gave the setup in the sense that one of the major themes is kind of growing up in a really super conservative, Orthodox Mormon home. And I think that's where you begin. Is that right?
Yep, that's where I began. So I was born in Utah, grew up in Utah. I was born in the late 60s. My parents built a house in the west side of the Salt Lake Valley. They built it a few years before I was born. And that's where I grew up, and that's where I lived my entire life until I moved out after high school. My parents were multi-generational Mormons. Mom tells me stories of people that trace clear back to Joseph Smith. Like, for example, John Solomon Fulmer was in the Carthage jail with Joseph Smith the night before he died. And I've got another great, I don't know how many
And his blood's running through your veins?
Yes.
Okay.
And then there's another great, I don't know how many greats grandpa that helped Joseph Smith shortly before he passed away. Mom tells a story about how he needed to cross a river, and so he gave him a ride in his boat, but there was a hole in the boat, so they had to bail water out the entire time. So Mom tells me stories of pioneers and just have a long Mormon history. My parents, as we mentioned, were very active in the church. They taught us the gospel. They lived the gospel. They believed it with all their hearts. All of my relatives are LDS. Dad came from a big family. There was 11 siblings. Most of them lived in the Salt Lake Valley, and so I got to know them. And we'd go to baptisms and baby blessings, and so we're always seeing the relatives. And Mom's family was also very active, and so we'd go to the same type of events with them. So essentially everybody I knew. I mean, we lived in a little subdivision, and in Utah, everybody is Mormon. And so I guess my point is that was my entire world. Mom was a school teacher by trade. She quit teaching school when she started to have kids so that she could be a stay-at-home mom. And Dad was a general contractor. Spent a lot of time framing houses. Mom took the role upon herself to teach us, before we started kindergarten. We didn't go to preschool. I remember she'd sit with us in the living room every day, and she'd teach me how to read. She'd read Dr. Seuss books to me, and then she'd read illustrated Book of Mormon books and the Bible, and the way that...
Do you remember the picture? Did you have the New Testament version as well?
We did.
Do you remember the version with like John the Baptist's head on the plate? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Those were intense. That was a part of my upbringing, just those illustrated books of Mormon and New Testament, Old Testament.
Yeah, before I was old enough to really understand the dialogue or the words in the book, Mom would just we'd flip through the pages, and Mom would tell me the story in her words. But the way that I was learning this was, honestly, all the stories in the Book of Mormon and the Bible were just as real as gravity, or the fact that the sun's going to come up every day. And there was nothing in my life to lead me to believe any differently. Essentially, the message is that I grew up in a very stable environment. And in thinking about this, after John asked us to do this, it gave me the opportunity to really think about what my childhood was like. And I realized that, I grew up in Utah. There's a lot of places in the world that are, not nearly as kid-friendly as Utah, but I lived in one house. My parents never moved. My mother still lives in the same place that they built before I was born. My parents loved each other. They were never divorced. They loved me. They loved the family. I was taught that I had a loving Heavenly Father, that our family was going to be together forever. I never had anybody that I really knew that died, so I didn't have the trauma of losing anybody. In fact, I made it all the way through high school before I ever lost anybody that I really knew. And as I mentioned, my parents' teachings were very consistent with everything that I was taught. And so, this is my world. As I mentioned, everybody around me, I'm sure, was Mormon, but when I was in elementary school, am I going too far here?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I guess I'll just kind of ramble until you stop me.
No. Be as intentional as I know you are.
Okay. So when I was in elementary school, I didn't feel like I really fit in with a lot of the other kids, because there was a lot of kids that I'm sure they were Mormon, but they swore, they used language that I didn't use, and so I thought, well, they must not be Mormon. And so I just thought, in my brain, that just didn't really work with, it was so foreign to me to do some of the things that some of the kids did at school, and so I felt at that age that I didn't quite fit in. My parents, I mentioned that they lived the gospel I guess, as I grew up, we had daily prayers, we had family home evenings, we went to church weekly. Now, I don't want it to sound like I was in an environment that was super strict. My parents believed in free agency. They taught us what we needed to do, but I never felt like I was being forced to do anything. I remember when I was in elementary school, I had friends that, I'd go out and roam the neighborhood and play, and I had friends that would always have to go ask their parents if they could go play, and I felt like, no, my mom doesn't make me ask if I go out or whatever. So it wasn't a strict environment, but it was very orthodox.
So not strict. Did it have all the normal things we would expect in the? I'm guessing it was 80s was kind of early 80s was kind of your high school years.
Yeah.
So Did you have the family prayer, like the family evening, obviously church every Sunday?
Oh, yeah.
All that stuff?
Yeah.
Was totally...
Yeah, Mom did most of our family home evenings, and she'd make a big deal out of it. Like, for example, every time it was somebody's birthday, she would, we had these 3 big bean bags in our family room, and so she'd stack the 3 bean bags together, and she'd put gold tinsel around the bean bags and kind of make a throne for whoever's birthday it was. And so we'd celebrate whoever's birthday it was that way. When I got the priesthood, Mom made a chart for the family and taught the lesson of the priesthood and showed that my priesthood went clear back to Joseph Smith and then back to God beyond that. And so Mom made a big deal of that. And Dad was, as I mentioned, a general contractor. Spent a lot of time with him. Mom would drop me off at the job sites, and I'd help him for, it seemed like a long time, but I was probably only out there for a couple of hours at a time. But it was probably, I probably wasn't as helpful as I thought I was. But I loved spending time with Dad. Loved going on hunting trips and camping trips with the family. Just things were good.
How many siblings?
I had 4 siblings, 5 of us total.
Okay.
They're all girls, so I was the only boy.
Oh, wow.
Second to the youngest.
Okay. So if you were just to kind of look back as objectively as possible, was it kind of like the Mormon dream? In what ways was it kind of the Mormon dream? And then was there anything that, looking back now, you might say, whatever you're comfortable sharing, about how maybe there were some parts that weren't ideal or even healthy, or
Okay.
if you're comfortable? I know your parents are your parents still alive? And
My mother's alive.
okay, and so I'm not trying to hurt her feelings or
Right.
anything. As if she'll listen,
When you say the Mormon dream, this was just my life. I didn't really look at it as a Mormon life, or
No, I mean
it
looking
was
back
just-
now.
In looking back now, I would say yes.
It's like Believe It to Beaver,
Yes,
Mormon version.
but things were different. Back in the 70s and early 80s, the church was a bit different in that a lot of the activities that we did, it seemed like the activities were more focused on social events. I spent a lot of time with Dad at steak farms picking tomatoes, or
At steak farms.
Yes.
So like every steak, we had peanut butter manufacturing in Houston. Your steak had
We had tomatoes and corn.
like farms,
like farms.
as part of church owned.
Yes.
And so you would go and do what?
And so we would go pick the tomatoes and deliver them to the bishop's storehouse.
Do you think they still do that today? Pick tomatoes?
I don't know. I haven't heard of it.
It's probably subdivisions now.
Yeah.
Where those
those places are all subdivisions now.
Yeah.
But I liked it because, I was probably 10 years old, and Dad let me drive the truck when they were picking the tomatoes, and so he'd put it in the granny gear, and I'd drive across the fields while people were putting tomatoes in the back of the trucks.
And what would the church do with the tomatoes?
They would take them to the bishop's storehouse, and I didn't really ask.
Because we didn't pick the peanuts, but we made the peanut butter. So I'm guessing they might have gone to some other ward or stake who would have made like spaghetti sauce or tomato paste, or right?
Could have done.
Yeah.
It was, like I say,
You don't know.
The thought never crossed my mind. It was just, I have to pick
Get the
these
corn,
tomatoes.
get the corn, get the tomatoes.
Right.
Okay.
And so,
Yeah, isn't that like? I wish I had that experience with my son, or my daughters. That's not been I mean, obviously, I'm not in the church, but even if I were in holiday, I don't think in the holiday ward or steak they're picking tomatoes or corn, right? So that's kind of cool. Like that seems like I'm a little bit sad that our modern youth don't have, or children don't have that experience maybe as much.
Yeah, and we had road shows, and it just seemed like a different environment back
Road
then.
shows. Tell listeners what road shows are. The younger people or the non-Mormons never Mormons will.
Basically, it's just each ward in the stake would put together a 15-minute show for everybody in the stake to watch, and
Kind of like musical theater kind of stuff, skits.
Yeah, just skits.
Plays, yeah.
There was usually some message involved, but
Singing and dancing, right?
Yeah. But it seemed to me like the messages were presented more subtly. Like, for example, when I went to scout camp, it was just camp. And, now they try to bring in more scripture, I don't know.
But back then it was just scouts, right?
Right.
It was just scouting.
It was just scouts.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the church for me at the time, although I knew, without a doubt that it was true, it was just more the social life.
Yeah, was it so in your face about truth claims, right?
Yeah.
It's like Popcorn Popping on the Apricot Tree is not a religious song, right?
Yeah.
If you chance to meet a frown, do not let it stay. Like a lot of these primary songs weren't about like, you must have a firm testimony of Jesus. I mean, there was, I hope they call me on a mission, but there wasn't Follow the Prophet, right? So it was a totally different mentality in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah.
People don't understand that. They think that always to get more modern means to get more liberal. But in the church has gotten more conservative over the past several decades, theologically in some ways.
Yeah.
True?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's kind of what I'm saying.
That it wasn't as Mormon-y as we might think.
Yeah. It wasn't about the gospel. I mean, the gospel was more about bringing people together, or at least it just felt different.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
that's really interesting.
That's my perspective anyway.
That's cool.
So.
I had the same experience. Yeah.
So,
like the church was true. We operated under that assumption, but then it was just about like much more about just living a happy, healthy life.
Yeah.
A little bit less about other sorts of things.
One of the things I remember about my dad was that he was brutally honest. He taught me honesty. And a story that I remember was when I was probably about 14 years old, I went to, it was Dad's birthday, and Mom decided she wanted to buy a tool for Dad. And like I say, he was a general contractor. So we had this place that he would shop for tools, just a small tool company. And Mom and I walked in, and the owner of the store came out, and he knew who we were. And, we said we're looking for something for Dad. And the owner of the store said, I would give your dad every tool in the store and not worry about getting paid. And that type of thing meant a lot to me. And so that was the environment I was raised in. When I was in high school, Dad was put in to be a bishop. I didn't like that very much. I felt like, I thought he'd do a good job at being bishop, but for me, I felt like I saw what bishops' kids were supposed to be like, and I thought, I'm not that kind of a person. And, in looking back, I think that was kind of a theme for my life, is that, I mentioned earlier that when I was younger, I felt like I didn't quite fit in with the other kids in school because, they weren't consistent with, their values didn't seem to be consistent with what I'd been learning. But it worked both ways. If I was in an environment where I felt like I was expected to be beyond what my, where I guess, to use a church term, if I was expected to be more righteous than I was or better than I was, then I was uncomfortable that way as well. And so I didn't like it because I felt like there's going to be certain expectations put on me, as a kid. But I never drank alcohol or did anything, in high school, or drugs or anything like that. I made it, went all the way through high school without having any of those kinds of issues. I didn't really like high school very much. I didn't really see the point. For me, there was one class that I failed in my life, and it was math when I was in high school. And
knowing you now, that doesn't
ironically,
sound
right. That was because I didn't really realize how important math was. When I was a senior in high school, I took an electronics class, and I learned that there was actually a point to math. It could actually be useful. And so once I learned that I could design a circuit and calculate all the voltages and currents throughout the circuit, and I put math to a real use. I loved it. In fact, I got a minor in math in college. I'd always planned on going on a mission until I got to be that age. And Dad was a bishop, and everybody just expected me to go on a mission. And essentially my attitude was when people would, rather than asking me if I'm going to go on a mission, they would ask me when I'm going to go on a mission. And so my thought was, if you're just going to expect it, my answer is not a chance in hell. I don't want to go on a mission. So anyway, that's kind of, I guess, me through high school. How far do you want me to go here?
That's good. So you did go on a mission, or you didn't?
I did.
Okay.
I guess I can continue the story to get up to the mission here. Graduated high school. Like I say, I'm certainly not going to claim that I was a goody two shoes by any means. I just felt like, because I wasn't a scriptorian. I loved the church, that it was true, but I didn't really care about, it's kind of like I knew that gravity is true. But I didn't care to learn everything there is to learn about it. So I never had any doubt that it was true, but I didn't spend a lot of extra time studying it. After high school, I did start to get in a little bit. I had kind of a wild streak. I did start to get friends that drank alcohol and tried some things that I'd never been comfortable with, and so I went down that path for a little while. Started doing things that were probably illegal but not harmful. And I remember, I'm not going to tell this story, but I told Mom some of the things that we had done, and she says, one day you're going to call me from jail. Anyway, that day did happen. Too long of a story.
Now I'm dying to know, like, what types of things, right? Like,
well,
are you pushing over cows? Are you knocking over mailboxes? Like, blowing things up, setting things on fire?
Those kinds of things. I went to Lagoon with a couple of friends, and Lagoon closed, and we climbed up on top of the roller coaster, and we're running up and down the roller coaster.
Oh, wow, that's intense.
Those kinds of things. And
that's intense.
We broke into a water park and ran up and down the slides and those kinds of things.
And then you paid for it later?
Well, there was...
Literally paid
there's
for it,
a...
exactly.
Yeah, one night, I don't know if I should say this or not, but this was a long time ago. We went up to the Alpine slide up in Park City, and we decided that we'd hike up to the top of the slide, and the cars were sitting up on top of the slide, so we rode down the slide, and then we thought that was so much fun, we went back up and did it again. Anyway, I felt guilty about that. Not too guilty, but like probably 10 years ago, I took the family to the Alpine slide, and I paid for an extra ticket for the Alpine slide just to kind of make up for our free rides 20 years earlier.
That sounds like, that's what we call scrupulosity in my business.
So anyway, started to get into some of those kinds of things. Like I say, I wouldn't say that it was anything that was harmful to anybody, but probably, well, obviously it wasn't legal because it did get me in jail. But that was about the time I decided I was going to really change my life.
Going to jail?
Yeah. Yeah, I was sitting there.
Do you remember which jail? Like which county? Is it county?
Salt Lake County Jail.
Is it still there now?
I don't know. I haven't been back. But I do remember sitting in there thinking, this is not my life. This is not what I want. Because I felt like I'm ready to go home now. It was just, I was out with friends in the middle of the night, and we're doing things we shouldn't have. And anyway, I didn't like that, and I decided that this is a pretty good time to make a change. So I ended up going to Utah State University.
Woohoo, go Aggies.
And
show me the Scotsman.
So up at Utah State, I found kind of the same friends. Had a lot of fun up at Utah State. My first year, it was kind of useless. and met a girl and got serious with her. And anyway, I remember feeling like my life was probably not what it should be still. And I had some aunts that had, that they weren't married. One of them had never been married, but the three of them drank coffee, and I think that's what pretty much kept them out of the temple. And they decided that they wanted to change their lives, and so they secretly went to the temple. And there was just something about that hit me hard. I just felt like, they did what they were supposed to do, and I felt like maybe I needed to turn things around a little bit. So I stopped doing the partying, and I got my life straightened out. In the grand scheme of things, it probably wasn't really that far off track, but it felt like, according to my conscience, that it was probably further off track than it should be. And
did you confess to your bishop? And
oh yeah, yeah, we went through everything, and I decided to serve a mission.
Those experiences with your bishop, were they positive? Were they healing? Were they punitive?
It felt more like just a necessary step. It's hard to go in and tell the bishop that you're not perfect and, lay everything out. It was a difficult thing to do. I look at it now and think it was really none of their business, but still, that's what I was supposed to do. It was a necessary step, and so I do it. I leave it. I did what I needed to do to go on a mission and feel like I was worthy. I don't know if I like that word anymore, but according to the church, I was worthy. And I was called to the Texas Dallas mission.
Nice.
Yeah.
What year?
Well, I was kind of a late bloomer. As I mentioned, when I was back then, the mission age was 19. And when I was 19, I was doing my other things, and I said that I wasn't going to go on a mission. I think one thing that made a difference for me was Dad said, "No, you shouldn't go on a mission." And once he said, "No, you shouldn't."
Reverse psychology.
Exactly.
Bill Cosby has a skit on that. Oh, it's not good to quote Bill Cosby.
No, it's not good.
I take that back. Scratch that.
But it wasn't them that were. My parents weren't really pressuring me to go in the first place. They wanted me to go. I knew they wanted me to go, but they didn't ever pressure me. It was really just other people that would. It was the expectation that I was going to go. It was just kind of the rebel side of me that, if you're going to ask me when I'm going to go rather than if I'm going to go, then I'm not going to go. I mean, for a long time I was kind of wishy-washy about it. And I went in and the bishop called me in and said, "I want you to go on a mission," or the Lord wants you to go on a mission. And I said, "Well, I got to think about it." And so he'd called me in, every couple of weeks and say, "Have you figured it out yet?" And finally he said, "I need an answer." And I said, "Well, if you need an answer now, then the answer is no." So you're probably kind of sensing a little bit of a stubborn streak here.
You're stubborn, Dave.
But anyway, so.
Anything, typical mission, anything like really important about your mission that you want to convey?
Well, probably not about the mission, but I did go through the temple before I went on a mission.
Okay, and? And you're older than me, so you would have had the real experience.
Yes, I had the real experience.
The pre-God-makers experience and all that entails.
Right. So I went to the Salt Lake Temple.
Which was live, so there's no film.
Right.
It's actors acting out the entire, for those who don't know.
And I went with
usually old men, right?
Yeah,
acting out all the parts.
Yeah, and I think any other temple would have been a better choice for me. That was a challenge. I remember when I was in high school before I went on the mission. One of my priesthood leaders had made the comment that when you go to the temple, you're going to wonder if this is the same church you grew up in, and. And I felt that way. And my parents are there, and I'm watching my mom and dad do all this stuff in the temple, and I'm just blown away. I mean, it was just not a good experience. But I had, excuse me, I had to do it to go on a mission. I wasn't excited about the whole garment concept. It was just, it just didn't really mesh with me.
And this comes into play later in Alyssa's story, is that right?
Uh-huh.
Maybe Keri's too, we'll see. But
so anyway, did the temple thing. I did the Provo Temple after that when I was in the MTC, and it was a little bit easier because
Gordon Jump was in the movie, and he had been on WKRP in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Gordon Jump, the actor, played Peter in one of the original Temple films.
Good times.
It's nice to see a friendly face. And Michael Ballum was Satan, right?
Yeah.
These are fun times.
Yeah.
Mormon pop culture.
Yeah. So I went to Dallas, and when I first got there, I had decided to go, but part of my hesitation was that I never felt like I was missionary material. I felt like I just looked at missionaries, with a certain high standard, and I thought, that's not me. And so for the first 2 weeks I was out there, I didn't even unpack my bags. My trainer thought I was a little weird because my bags or all my stuff is in the suitcase. He made some comment about it, and finally I decided, I guess I'll unpack my bags. And anyway, but I really got into it. I learned what the Book of Mormon was for the first time, even though my parents had taught me what it was. I really dug into it and figured things out. I read every book that they'd let me read: Jesus the Christ, Articles of Faith, and
Miracle Forgiveness, Marvelous Work and a Wonder.
Yep.
Those are the four.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So first half of my mission, I was a little hesitant, but I started to slowly get into it, and by the time I was done, I think that some of the missionaries looked at me as a little bit more relaxed. For the first year I was out there, we did some, I wasn't a real strict rule follower. By the end of the mission, I was a pretty strict rule follower.
You got converted.
I did.
Love it.
That was the point, wasn't it?
So that is the point of missions, to convert the missionaries, right?
So
yeah. Cool. So finished your full 2 years and had a great experience?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I did. It was a good experience. To this day, I look at it as a good experience. I'm glad that I did it. I know it's traumatic for some people, but I think there was a lot of skills that I learned on my mission that are still useful today. It worked out well.
How do you describe, this is going to sound like a weird question, I probably never asked this before, but how do you describe your personality type? Like introverted?
Probably, yeah.
And would you say high anxiety, low anxiety, medium anxiety?
It's a good question for Keri.
Keri, what do you...
That's pretty valid.
Go ahead, Keri, what were you going to say? How would you describe Dave's personality? Like his base personality?
I think he's got more anxiety than he thinks he does.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why I'm asking is, like, for someone of your personality type, it seems like the church could be very bad or very good. And when I say very good, what I mean is it would force you to do and learn and try things that you, in no other context would you otherwise possibly do. And so what I'm getting a sense for is that maybe there are ways that the church is really good for you because it got you out of your shell, got you to try things and do things that maybe your personality type wouldn't have allowed you to do otherwise. Is there truth to that or not?
I think it was. The thing that was probably, I think that one of the big hindrances for me and with my personality is that if I look at someone, if I look at, I don't know how to, I guess what I'm trying to say is, let me jump forward a little bit and tell you a little story just to explain how I think I feel. Years later, I was an Elders Quorum president. And as an Elders Quorum president, I had one of my counselors that came to me one day. I was just in my office at work, and he came to me and sat down and said, I can't do this. I feel like, it's not that it's a difficult thing for me to do, but it represents something that I'm not. And for me, I think that with my personality, honestly, I was jealous of the guy. I thought, you're spot on. I mean, I wish I had the courage to basically step out of things that aren't me, but sometimes I felt like I had to, just go through the motions. And so my personality is that I feel like I have to be consistent with who I am, and it's hard for me to play a role that I'm not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an important theme. So consistency, authenticity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. But up through your mission, you were becoming consistent and authentic, but the gospel was kind of focusing you in healthy directions. Fair to say?
I think so.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I go through high school, and it's not that I loved it, but I felt like my parents raised me such that things weren't strict, but there was some definite strict boundaries. When it came to alcohol, very strict boundaries. When it came to girls, very strict boundaries. Pretty much anything else, they didn't push me. They gave me my free agency. But anyway.
Okay. All right. So we'll pause there. Is that all right?
Yep.
Keri, it's your turn.
Oh, dear.
I get a sense you didn't have quite the same experience as Dave.
No, and it's funny because I know that, but as I'm listening to him, I'm thinking, very opposite, very opposite, very opposite.
Yeah. So tell us about your background.
Well, I grew up, my mom was a convert. She went to Rick's College as a non-member, go figure, back in the, what would that have been, 60s, I guess.
And she grew up in Idaho,
She
right?
grew up in,
No?
well, she was born back east in Boston area.
Okay.
They moved to Idaho Falls for a job that my grandpa had. So she went to high school there. And then I guess that's probably why she went to Rick's, because it was close by. Met my dad, my dad's family was a lot like Dave's family. Very orthodox, pioneer stock, the whole 9 yards. In fact, my grandma, my dad's mom, is the first person I thought of when I met Dave's mom, because I'm like, you are exactly like my grandma Morgan. Like, they're just super, super, super orthodox, very gentle, kind. Anyway, I think one of my ancestors was a bodyguard for Joseph Smith at some point, and anyway, very, very Mormon. My mom's family was very Catholic. In fact, my grandmother's name was Mary, after, and she went by her middle name, and that was just kind of how that whole side of the family was. But my mom wasn't, but they weren't really practicing. They were she was pretty non-religious, but anyway, so she married my dad, and they divorced when I was 6. And my mom had kind of a weird experience with the ward when they divorced. And so she pretty much left the church at the time. So my dad was hardcore active. My mom was not. And my sister and I spent most of our time with her. We'd see my dad like every other weekend. Luckily, they stayed in the same town. They stayed good friends, and it was all cordial and good that way. But very opposite. My mom was just free spirit. She was kind of hippie, just very loving, free-spirited type. And my dad was about the kindest person you'll know, but very, very Mormon. So we would, but like I said, 8% of the time was with my mom, so that was kind of the main influence. And then, so the church wasn't really, I was baptized when I was 8. I wasn't a convert, but I felt like one, because it wasn't really part of I didn't have the road shows, I didn't have the girls' camp, stake dances, any of that stuff. I think I did actually go once, but that was not for the right reasons. So anyway, so I just grew up. Our mothers are both extremely kind people and about as opposite as you can be. So that was my basic childhood.
Okay. So not an Orthodox
Not
Mormon
at all.
upbringing.
No. I mean, I was
Nominally Mormon.
vaguely familiar, like I'd heard things, but I think my dad just recognized that wasn't. He just didn't push it. So he remarried, and they were active, went to church. My stepmom was Young Women's president, and he was in the bishopric, and but they didn't really say a lot to us about it because I think they just kind of let my mom do that. So yeah, I was vaguely familiar, but not very.
So was religion a part of your upbringing at all? So a secular upbringing?
Pretty secular, yeah.
Where it was like, we don't believe in God, or we're atheists, or was it just
It wasn't
like,
even, I don't even remember it even being really addressed.
Okay.
It just wasn't really a thing. It was just, my mom was good and kind for the sake of being good and kind, because she just was. It wasn't because she was told to or because she was looking for something. That's just who she was. And so I honestly just didn't really ever. I remember having a couple of family prayers with my dad, but like, it just wasn't. It was pretty secular.
Was it a Mormon town?
Boise area.
So what percentage of your friends would have been Mormon?
Very few. My
Really?
high school was very, yeah.
Why do I think of Boise as still like 40% Mormon?
And maybe it is.
Okay.
My high school was
Not.
not. I mean, there were a few, but it wasn't strong at all. I mean, Christian. There's a lot of Christian general, but I didn't know very many Mormons.
Were you pretty happy in your
Yeah,
upbringing?
very happy.
It was a
very
happy upbringing.
childhood. Oh yeah, my mom and my sister and I, people called us the Three Musketeers because we looked very similar and we were together all the time. And
And there's no guy around.
she remarried and divorced.
Okay.
So then when we were in high school, it was just the three of us.
That's interesting.
It was really fun.
But you loved it.
Loved it. Loved it. We were super close. And then my sister moved to college. It was just my mom and I for a couple of years. I mean, she was dating a guy by then, but I just had lots of time with her. And I was really close to my dad. We just church wasn't really ever a thing. So
So everything was good.
everything was great. Yeah, I had a great childhood. It was just, what
What happened?
are you trying to say, John?
She met me and I messed it all up.
You messed it up somehow this got messed up. No.
Well, okay, when I got later into high school, I definitely had my rebel. Of course, I didn't really feel like a rebel.
Experimentation.
A little bit of experimentation.
in the world,
Nothing dramatic and huge, but had some party friends, and it was great, though. I mean, I thought they were great.
Had a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Moved to USU. But the only reason I moved to Utah was because I was in a car accident just after graduation, and I broke my collarbone, and I was still pretty laid up. And this was at the time they were on the quarter system, so school didn't start until 1st of October, end of September. So I had an extra month to heal. So I'm like, okay, I'll go there for a year just so I go and don't skip a year, and then I'll go back to Boise.
Because it could have been Boise State, it
Right.
could have been University of Idaho in
Yes.
Moscow, or it could have been, what's the other one?
A friend and I were looking
Idaho
at
State.
Oregon, but
Idaho
yeah, we were
State,
actually looking at
Pocatello.
but I probably would have been at Boise State, I'm guessing. But
Yeah, so why Utah? Like
only because of that late start date. That was the only reason. It was close
Your dad had
by.
gone.
My dad.
That's kind of a weird reason to go to a university. Is that rude to say?
No, it is. I just knew
Well, it's either that or
at
wait,
the
right?
time.
Yeah, you didn't want to wait.
Well, I didn't want to wait. I honestly thought if I waited, I wouldn't go. I was kind of floating personality at that time. I hadn't found myself. I was just
Did you know what you wanted to study?
not really. I mean, I always liked. I started in interior design because I enjoyed that, and I kind of ended up flipping that to my minor. But it was that, or I wanted to be a journalist, so I ended up majoring in journalism. But anyway, I just thought if I go there, my dad went for a year. He had some Utah State experience, so he said it's great. I'd never even been to Logan when I literally was driving there to live there. I had never even been there. But I thought, oh, it's a year. It'll just give me something to make sure I go.
How much
And then I'd go back.
How much exposure had you had to Mormons?
Very little.
So you didn't know much about the church. Did you identify as a Mormon?
No.
Didn't identify as a Mormon.
In fact, my roommates, I just answered an ad for somebody looking for a roommate, and they were all Mormon, but I didn't They were nice. They were, of course, I was a non-member, so I mean, I was a member, but anyway. So
you go to Utah State, go to Logan.
It was great. The
Cache
first year
Valley.
was kind of like Dave's, and then it was kind of useless. I just pretty much was all social and didn't get a lot of schooling. But after about the end of my first year, I was feeling like I needed to get some direction. And of course, my roommates were there to offer that. And
What do you mean get direction?
I just felt like I was kind of floating. I mean, I wasn't like, Dave's always been, he's known what he wanted to do since he was 12 years old. And I just didn't. I felt like I was kind of...
Were you studious?
Not really. I mean, I
think
like
of you
to
as
learn,
intelligent,
but
so-
I'm not at, well, thank you. But I mean, my girls are the 4.0 students. I wasn't. I enjoyed learning, but I wasn't. I'm very right-brained, so that's why I wanted to do the journalism thing. I enjoyed school, but I don't know. I didn't love the tests and the stress, but
Okay.
I enjoyed the classroom and the environment. I do get a little stressed out, but I was just feeling like I was kind of unsure I was feeling a little stressed out with my major. I didn't really know what I was doing. I felt like I was hanging out with all these frat people, and, I'm like, maybe I need to, like, get more of a direction. So my roommate started taking me to church.
What year was this?
91.
91. Okay.
So
All right. So I'm a sophomore, junior at BYU. All right. I'm just kind of getting the
Okay.
timeline going. All right.
So
So your roommate says come to church, and what goes through your mind? Like,
I was resistant at first. I was like, I'm not.
what did you think
churchy
about Mormons?
person.
What did you think about Mormons?
I didn't really know any except
Really?
for them, and
Yeah.
they were nice.
Okay,
And
so-
I knew like one or two.
They weren't weird Mormons.
They
or
were
like
weird. No, they were
super Molly conservative.
No,
They were just normal kids.
They were cool.
but just nice.
I knew like a couple in my high school, and they were the super Molly. So that anyway, so it was nice to meet some that seemed more like me, and so I kind of jumped onto that. That was really. I was like, wow, it has all these answers. It's basically this handbook for life. I don't have to think about anything. I just do. Look, it's all spelled out for me. And then I meet Dave, who's got it all figured out, and so I just jumped on the bandwagon. And
So you're in the singles ward, and you start getting exposed to the teachings, the doctrine, the theology. You see these cute boys, and in your mind, it's like,
yeah.
And so do you start becoming intellectually, spiritually curious?
Yeah. That's about when the Work in the Glory books came out. Do you remember those? And I read
Gerald
them
Lund,
all.
right? You read them all?
I read them all twice.
Whoa.
There's like 9 of them.
So that's like your exposure to church
Yes.
history. You
Well,
didn't
for
get
me,
seminary.
Right. Exactly. And fast forward a little bit, went through the temple and was completely freaked out and confused. But this was history. So, I mean, it was
Wait, history.
historical element,
History.
right, in quotes. So I could understand that. That felt like, and I really just fell in love with Joseph Smith and just thought that whole thing was so beautiful and wonderful and just happy and
And the
neat little bow on
the plan of
life
salvation,
and- yeah.
you're like, did you take the discussions from the missionaries?
No, I didn't
What?
actually. I know. I should have.
Which is already a member.
That's true.
They couldn't
I will.
count.
Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah, you remember. You were
I was a member,
baptized.
so
Okay.
I just
Did you ever call home and say, Mom, why didn't you raise me in this? This is great.
I did, actually. And she said, the only thing she really ever said to me about the church was, I never bought the Joseph Smith story.
Oh.
I'm like, well, you need to read the Book in the Glory then. So,
Oh, wow.
the two,
So your mom wasn't freaking out. Like, don't do this. Like, stay away. It's
she
a
freaked
trap.
out a little. She freaked out a little bit, but she didn't know any of the stuff that I would later learn. She just said 2 things that bothered her. Well, one, she never really bought the Joseph Smith story, she said. And the other thing was the priesthood ban. Because she was married to my dad in the early 70s.
Before the blacks got the
Before
priesthood.
the blacks got the priesthood. And she said she remembered the day that the ban was released. And she said, she described, she was in the kitchen and she just fell to the ground and sobbed because she was so happy that, and that was always a big barrier for her. And it was for me too. I mean, that always bothered me too, but.
So, so your mom was kind of smart and sensitive to social issues, apparently, and that's interesting.
She was.
Yeah, that's what takes people out. So, but that wasn't enough to keep you out.
No, because she didn't say a lot. She was very. She also could see that I was happy, and I think she was trying to not taint my experience. So I think she told me that, but she also was supportive and just kind of let me.
Yeah, when your kid's in college, you just want them to be happy.
Yep.
You want them to like get along and do well and feel good.
Right. Exactly.
And I can see why, as long as there wasn't any big, huge red flags.
Right.
It's just like,
and I don't think she ever really thought there was. I think it was just, for her, wasn't a good fit. She didn't really, have all this information.
She was like, the church is not true.
Right,
Don't
no.
join. No, it's just
not
like
at all.
Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, Mormon, like if it's working for you, churches, go to church.
She was disappointed about the wedding, that she'd be standing outside the temple. And that was the most she ever said, was that, are you sure? Can you just get sealed later? And just kind of, but it was like one comment, and then she really didn't push it after that. She was just super supportive.
And what was it like for you? You were so close to your mom and sister. What was it like for you to contemplate them not going? Or were you so caught up in the dream, you were like, oh, sorry, guys?
I was just caught up in the dream until we'd been engaged for a couple of months, and I kind of started having a freak out about that. But we just decided, no, we got to start things off on the right foot. We're going to do it the right way. We'll be blessed. All of that. And I'm sobbing on the inside of the temple, and my sister and my mom are sobbing on the outside of the temple. And it was...
So all this was happening. Sorry to cut you off.
No.
I was probably a little bit insensitive because I felt like anybody that wants to go in the temple can do it. They just have to.
Yeah.
He's like,
they're not keeping her out. She's keeping herself out,
in
right?
fact, they want her to come in. They want everybody to come in. Join the church. Do whatever you got to do. Come to the temple.
Yep.
And later, my attitude had changed quite a bit. We'll get to that.
But I kind of bought into that at the time too, because I felt she was a member. She, like it wasn't this horrible experience. I'm like, my sister never really was active, but I don't know. I still feel this like punch in the gut about that day, and that was 26 and a half years ago.
So we'll come to that really quick. What did you love about Dave? And what was he like?
Well, the rebel streak didn't hurt.
You liked that?
I liked that. Yes.
How did that come through? Once he was post-mission, he would have been all Peter Priesthood.
Because he was very Peter Priesthood when we met, and that was the kicker with Dave, was that he had it all figured out. He knew what he was doing in his life. He had it all. He had his crap together. But at the same time, there was this edge part that was in there. So I'm like, that's a good balance of he's fun and he won't think I'm a heathen for my past, but then he also has his stuff figured out. So it felt like a good...
Because once you're learning about the law of chastity and all that and the word of wisdom, you're like, oh, well, my past... all of a sudden now my past is bad. Your past was bad.
Right.
But then if you knew that Dave had a past too, he wasn't going to judge you for it.
Exactly.
When Natasha...
And we could together go,
So that was nice, that he had a past, but he knew where he was going.
Right.
What about his personality?
Right.
What about his personality drew you to him?
He's very stable, very calming, and I am more high-strung. I'm more outgoing, but I'm also more emotional, so he kind of leveled me.
I haven't seen that part of Keri.
The what?
Is that true?
It's there.
You've always been pretty
really
stable when I'm not saying emotional is unstable, but all our interactions have always been very straightforward.
Well, I'm glad I don't come off crazy. But I definitely am more high strung than he is.
Or compared to Dave.
So I feel like I kind of boost him a little bit, and then he levels me a little bit.
Good. Yeah, that's how it should work. So you like his stability, his focus.
Yes. Because I felt like I was just sort of floating, and so he really sort of grounded me. It was.
And coming from a family where your mom had been divorced a few times, were you kind of worried about marriage and whether it would last? Or
you'd think I would be. It's weird. You would think that I would have been more worried than I was, but
you weren't. You were excited.
I was.
And he was your man.
He's my man.
And you knew it from the start.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Dave,
Yep.
what'd you love about Keri?
Oh, goodness. Everything. I think probably the best way to say it is we would talk a lot, and it just felt like we really synced. When we got married, for example, we went on a honeymoon to Oregon, and we drove the whole way. I remembered when we got back realizing that we'd never turned the radio on even once. We just talked the entire time, and that's just, and we still do that. We drive down to St. George quite a bit, and we talk a lot.
That's good. That's called emotional intimacy.
And so, she had really nice legs, still does.
Is that weird to hear your parents talk about each other that way?
Very romantic.
No, I just felt like we made a connection. I was head over heels right from the start. So.
Well, did it bug you at all that she came from a quote broken home? I come from parents of divorce, so I'm putting that in air quotes for those listening. Broken home, like family that weren't super orthodox. Like you had the ultra orthodox upbringing. She didn't come from that. Was that a problem, or did you like that, or was it something you overlooked, or was willing to tolerate?
It wasn't a problem at all, because I was probably a little bit naive in thinking that I thought I knew what marriage was supposed to be like. And so I looked at my parents and thought, that's marriage. And so once we get married, that's life. And I didn't stop and think that other people might have a different perspective of marriage or life or anything else. And so I wasn't worried because I knew we had this strong connection. I knew that I loved her, and I knew that, no, it didn't bother me, didn't worry me.
Good. All right. And something that I don't know that's going to be able to come through in this interview, but I'm just going to say it. Like, I personally have a huge respect for entrepreneurs, people who are able to build interesting and successful businesses. And we don't have to go into the details about your business, but you guys have built a really cool business, a business that, like, when I've learned about it, I'm like, this is freaking cool. And it's in Cache Valley, and it comes from an engineering background, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
So I'm just curious, like, as you were like starting to study at Utah State, when did you realize you wanted to be an engineer? And was that something that you knew by the time you met Keri? And what vision did you have? Did you have like a career or a professional role model that you were kind of shooting towards?
I knew that I wanted to go into electronics when I was in 9th grade.
Did you get a Radio Shack like circuitry board thing? You did?
I did.
I had pulled that out of nowhere.
It was called a 150 in 1 electronics project kit, and I built projects. I took a little class in junior high school in 9th grade. And we built things out of kits. It wasn't until I was a senior that I realized that you had to really be good at math to really excel in electronics. That's when, the first class that I had taken that actually used math in electronics. But my attitude was, if I have to learn math, then I'm going to learn math because I want to do something in electronics. I wanted to build electronics. My attitude at the time was, when I was in high school, is I don't care about the degree. I just want to learn electronics, and I want to start a company and build really cool electronic gadgets.
Like what?
Well, at the time, I wanted to build audio amplifiers.
Because you liked music?
Because I liked music.
So like PV or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, I'd go down and, it was a time when people would put big amplifiers and speakers in their cars. And so I was I'd looking at all the specs and finding the perfect amplifiers. And I wanted to do something better than what was out on the market. And that was that's what got me moving in that direction anyway. But I started out at Utah Technical College. It's now Salt Lake Community College. And I didn't see a counselor or anybody. I just signed up. I just thought, I want to learn that, so I'm going to sign up for that class. And then I went to another class and signed up for that one. And I remember I went to one class where I had a German instructor. His last name was Zeisler. And first day in class, I go in and sit down, and the guy's got a really strong accent. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to learn anything from this guy. And so I had kind of a bad attitude, but realized I needed to learn this stuff. And so after a couple of days, I got used to his accent, and I realized that he was really a good instructor. And I was asking a lot of questions. Like I say, it wasn't the grades or it was just I wanted to understand the material. And so I remember sitting in his office one day, and I'm asking him all these questions. He said, if this is what you want to do, if you really want the answers to these questions, you should go to engineering school. And so, in my mind, I think it was like a week later, I signed up for Utah State.
Oh, wow.
And so I just...
Because Utah State's had a pretty strong engineering program.
Yes.
Historically.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, go Aggies.
So that was kind of what pushed me in that direction. It wasn't because, I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't really think about how I needed to do it. And so I appreciated this guy for giving me the nudge I needed to go in that direction.
That's cool.
And then when I was at Utah State, I had the same attitude. I did, first year I didn't do all that great. Like I say, it was social and so on and so forth. But when I came back from my mission, and that's one of the things that was awesome about the mission, is it really taught me some discipline. I hit it hard. I wanted to, my focus was school, and I wanted to learn this stuff. I didn't, I did get good grades. I got really good grades after the mission. And this was, it just, I think the mission was good for me at that time, because it gave me the transition between not taking life so seriously to, let's just hit it hard.
Right.
So.
Okay. All right. So you're studying engineering. You meet Keri.
Uh-huh.
You guys got married. What year? 93.
June of 93.
That's the year Margie and I got married.
Awesome.
Just a few months before Margie and I got married. And you still had a couple years to go, or were you pretty close to being
Had
done?
a couple years to go. Yeah.
Okay. And by then, did you have a major, Keri?
Journalism.
Okay. You were journalism.
Yep.
You were electrical engineering?
engineering.
Okay. And you got married. Okay. So did you want to talk about what the temple was like for you at all? Did we already talk about that?
We didn't talk about it, but it was just...
Was it a thing or not a thing?
Yeah, no, it was not good.
The funny thing is, it never crossed my mind that I should go with her.
When
so
she was taking out her
Well,
endowments.
right.
Okay.
It was
So,
just...
and I had no family, obviously.
So you went alone?
My roommate took me through my endowment. How
Wow.
ridiculous is that? I know. And I...
You would have missed the weird stuff, because
I did miss-
93
yes.
was...
Thank goodness.
It's all weird, but like you would have... You missed the violent stuff.
Yes.
For those
Thank
who don't
goodness.
know what we're talking about, look it up. Look up New Name Noah,
Yeah.
early temple ceremony. You could blood oaths and, penalties and really bad stuff. But
Yeah.
you missed that. Okay.
I missed that, thank goodness.
But there
And
were still the feminism problems.
Yes.
Would you even been tuned into that at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I was, but I didn't realize I was building a shelf from the very beginning. But it was kind of, I blamed a lot of my, I walked in the temple with my roommate, and we sat in the, got changed in our white clothes, sat in the chapel, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is so peaceful and wonderful, and this is what they're talking about. When people talk about how wonderful and peaceful the temple is, it's just going to get better from here. And it didn't. It really didn't. And so, and then the ceremony starts, and I'm just so, it went from being really nice and peaceful to just confusing and boring and sexist, and I couldn't. It's
So
like
you
it was
noticed
so,
the
and I'm sitting
sexist
there with
stuff.
my roommate. I did.
You like the fact that, which parts? Just
That you have to hearken to that God goes directly to the man, but then the woman has to go through the husband.
So the husband
the-
makes a vow to God, but the woman vows to the husband, right?
Right.
To hearken to the husband while he hearkens to the
Right.
father.
Right.
So
And
your
that
covenant's
just-
with your husband,
Right.
his covenant's with God.
Right.
Okay.
And that was, yeah.
That bothered you?
That bothered me.
Because I obviously I'm a man, but I didn't notice. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
that's fine.
It
whatever.
bothered me more later, because at that time I was a convert pretty much, and so I hadn't been around the culture long enough to recognize how much of the culture is that way and how much is geared toward the man, and the woman has to fall in line. And so it bothered me, but I kind of blamed it on the fact that I was a newbie, and I didn't grow up with this stuff, and it'll come. I'm sure that I'm just behind on this whole spirituality thing, and the longer I'm in it, the more I go, they say, then I'll get it. So it bothered me, but it's the right thing. It's true. I mean, I really believed it was true, so it was
it's our problem.
It's my lack.
Yep.
And when I'm more faithful, when I've been there enough, when I've put in the time and whatever, then it'll click for me.
Okay.
So, yeah, it wasn't great, but I just kind of figured next time it will be.
And then your mom and sister, was your dad there?
He this was kind of funny, is when I got engaged, he's the one person that I thought would be, because we decided to get married in the temple right away. He's the one that I thought would be, because he was in the bishopric when I left. And I called him like, Dad, we're getting married and we're doing it in the temple. And he was like, oh, congratulations, I won't be there. And I was like, what? No, you're the one person that was going to. So he has his own whole story. But by then he had read Mormon Enigma and was kind of on his own
Church history
path. Yes.
rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
So
But this was in the early 90s, so there wasn't, he didn't know.
this was the year the September 6th were excommunicated.
Mhm. It was just,
Yeah.
a couple months later.
Yeah.
So it was all books for him.
Right.
But
Because there was no internet
exactly.
in 93.
Exactly. But he's a reader, and he'd been reading stuff, and
Interesting.
so he said he ended up being there. He
But he didn't say, stay away from the church. It's not true. He
no,
didn't
and
tell
he
you.
was just like my mom, and just so supportive, and I can see that you're happy, so I'm not going to mess that up, which now I'm like, we've had some really good conversations.
You wish he had told you.
I do.
Oh, okay.
But
Because that's an argument. Like, if they're happy, leave them alone. But you're saying you wish he had told you.
I do, but as a parent of adult children, I understand. It's so hard. I mean,
right.
I'm in that position now, and I
Yeah.
mean, you just want to support him, and he was always very supportive. So so he ended up being there, but he told me later, basically I just had to catch up on my tithing, and then I could come pay my admission ticket, is how he put it. So he was there, but that was it. That was the only family I had there.
So he was there.
He does.
Okay. But not taking you through.
No.
Just
my roommate was the only one that was there.
That's a totally different experience. Like not having any family there, really.
I know. I hear all the stories. Yeah, after that,
and Dave probably had this huge entourage of like.
And at the wedding, it was just huge entourage.
It was full.
All the Witbecks and then like a couple.
I'm like, hi. It's just me. So.
Okay. So I want to get Alyssa in, but so you guys got married, and I know I know you've had an interesting career. What do you guys want to say about your marriage and kind of like your relationship and the role the church played from the time you got married to when your kids started coming?
I think we were living the Mormon dream.
Okay.
I mean, we were doing it. We were just. I was in the primary presidency. He's the elders quorum president. Because I guess that was a few years later, but we were just very, very faithful.
Were you having couples prayer? Were you praying as a couple every night? And were you having family evening even?
We didn't, but
Probably
we did it.
Not till the kids
But we were really good about it when they were little. When they got bigger, we kind of did a Monday night, we're all together, but we didn't necessarily
Together
do
time.
that. But we did really when they were little.
Scripture study together as a couple?
Yeah, on and off.
Yeah.
It's
No,
always nobody's perfect at that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Personal prayers, all that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Living the word of wisdom. And
Yep.
I think
yeah.
we probably spent, out of the 24 hours in a day, probably, 2 hours a day praying? No, it felt that way sometimes, though.
No,
There's a lot of prayers in the church.
There are.
Yeah. And was it a pretty traditional, like, male breadwinner? He's going to have the career.
Actually,
you're going to get pregnant.
At the very beginning, I worked full time while he finished school.
You put him through.
I put him through. I got the PhD degree that they gave me.
What does that tell?
Putting him through. They actually gave me that at graduation.
I don't think I've heard that before.
Yeah.
PhD.
Yeah,
That's new.
So it's like,
hard
that
to get
doesn't make
a
me
new
feel
one on me.
good. I know you're trying to make me feel good, but that was not good. But anyway, it was nice.
Why wasn't it good?
I just felt, it felt undermining. It was like, I don't know.
At the time you felt that way?
Yeah. I just felt like it's all about, I don't know. But he was the one that knew what he was doing. I didn't. So it made sense. that he was the one doing it.
Did you want to
But-
go work for the New York Times or be some journalist, Barbara
Yeah.
Walters? Like, did you have heroes? Did you
Yeah, not in particular. I
journalist
just
heroes?
wanted
Edward
to-
R. Murrow, who was it?
Not really anyone in particular. I just loved
Journalism.
journalism.
But you didn't consider a career.
I really didn't, because at the time, right after we got married, I stopped getting I didn't help with school from my family, so I didn't get any help with tuition. We're paying for his. It seemed really stupid to pay for both of ours, and we just decided that when we have kids, I'm going to stay home.
Ugh.
So why go into so much debt?
That's affecting me. Does it? You're nodding, Alyssa. Why are you nodding?
Yeah, I think it's just, sad that that's kind of.
So when
culture.
when our kids were going to school, I'm like, I don't care what happens, you'll have our support all the way through your degree. You do. I mean, and they're both graduating in May. But we made dang sure that they didn't feel that way.
So looking back, you regret it, but at the time, you also weren't
At the
loving
time,
that.
no. At the time,
But
it felt like the thing to do, because I was floating. He was sure that was going to be the breadwinner. I was going to be. Why should we go into all this debt just so that I can check a box?
Just so a woman can
Just so I
get
can
an
be
education.
educated and
Why? Yeah, why bother? I mean, and folks now won't realize that there were these culture wars going on in the late 80s and early 90s where like Ezra Taft Benson would give a general conference talk and say the woman's place
Yes.
is in the home.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And women who work will deprive their children of the nurturing and the loving that they need. And even back then, women were still working outside the home, but it just made everybody feel awful.
Right.
And it was just like this cultural clampdown. And I imagine you were living in the wake of that.
Yeah,
Is that true?
Absolutely.
So that would have influenced you,
Yeah.
just this guilt and shame. And it's like, it's
If I even love my kids at all, then I'll,
oh, that hurts. If I even love my kids at all,
Yeah.
I won't have any
Right.
type of
Right.
interests or pursuits other than motherhood.
Pretty much.
Oh,
See, I kind of missed the boat on that one.
what do you mean?
What I mean is that in my mind, we're one, and we're going to, we need to figure out how we're going to, get through this life and pay for things and whatever. And I had all that figured out, and she was going to, I looked at it like it was, I had my role and she had her role.
Yeah, of course
And-
you
Well,
did.
of course it is.
And so
It makes-
I'm saying this like I realized that the impact that it had on her now. At the time, I didn't. At the time, I felt like this is the plan. What's wrong with it's a good plan. What's wrong with the plan?
He's got the
But-
engineer brain. It's just, it makes
but-
sense. It just logically makes sense.
Okay, I have a
but-
question.
Yeah.
Keep going, and then I want to.
Well, I was just going to say, but now I realize that I wish we would have been able to do that. I wish we would have let her or figured out a way to make it work at the time, because I know that it would have made a difference, for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And I didn't recognize that at the time.
Yeah. So what was going through my mind is the fact that you about her family was like they can come to the temple, they just need to get
Yes.
worthy and get baptized,
Exactly.
right? Like that attitude. Like I've known you for a while, and I'm always like, oh, Dave's great. That part of how you were probably then wouldn't have, if I went back then wouldn't have bugged me as much. But like, I'm wondering if that was hard to live with. Like you love Dave, and obviously you chose him, but like there's a strictness, there's a harshness, there's almost like engineering plus Mormonism can be kind of pharisaical, right?
Yeah, very much so. And the Mormonism kind of validates everything that he's thinking. I mean, he's got this very orthodox upbringing. I have this hippie upbringing. My mom's very just
Love and
love everyone, and we're all good, and it. So I think that personality difference was the key of the core of any of it, was that I tended to be a little more free spirited that way, and he was so rigid.
I thought there was one way to do things.
Exactly.
Essentially.
There was one, and the church validated that. It backed it up. Yes, there's one right way to do things, and we'll tell you exactly what that one right way is. So,
And like there's a value to that because there's just like an order and a structure and everybody knows their role and there can be efficiencies because you're doing the career and you're taking care of the family and the home and in theory, it can all work out great.
Right.
But my 2020 sensibilities, it really rubs me wrong because it's
Right.
like you're just having it. Like I'm thinking about your personality, your free spirit, you're more emotional. Number one, you're having to pack all that down and like submit,
Yep.
which is literally the words that were
Yes.
used.
Yeah.
You're submitting, and then also, and we'll get to this maybe with Alyssa, but like the way that the Orthodox conservative Mormon pathway leaves young women so vulnerable.
Yes.
You were just going right into that slot of like no education,
Yep.
completely relying on him.
Yep.
And if he was an abusive, kind of priesthood authoritative jerk, your life becomes hell and there's nothing you can do.
Exactly. And I was so lucky that he wasn't, and not everybody is that.
Exactly. So he was
Right.
Pharisaical, Sadduceical, or strict or harsh engineering, but also kind and
Right.
loving and reasonable.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
I
That's
should
true.
I
No,
should
yes.
be letting you.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so you were kind of lucky
Yes.
and unlucky, but more lucky than
Right.
unlucky.
Yeah, for sure.
So just to clarify here,
Now that we made you out to be a monster.
my mindset has changed.
Yeah.
it's-
And so what I was going to ask you, Keri, is was it a problem? Was his engineer brain plus conservative Mormonism, did it start emerging early in the marriage as like, oh my gosh, he's really strict or he's really linear in his thinking?
It did. It didn't. I noticed it the most when the kids were little and we were starting our business, and he was so focused on getting this business going that, I mean, he's gets a little tunnel vision and can focus on one thing at a time, and that was like life. I mean, he was just so consumed by that I felt very much like I'm taking care of the kids. He's got that going, and it all makes sense logically. You put it all out. He's like, well, I'm doing this now so we can have this security later, and that all makes sense. So I could rationalize it that way, but I did feel there was a lot of lonely times that I felt kind of like a single parent. But then, we'd have we always made sure we had our Saturday date night. We did that our whole marriage.
Really?
Always.
That's cool. Where'd that come from?
We always did something for our anniversary, like overnight. We would go away for our anniversary, and we did Saturday night dates every week. Always.
That's great.
We just always did
Where did that come from?
I don't even
Do you
know.
even
how
know?
that
Was it
even-
like something a seminary teacher said, or
No,
was it your
just-
parents as role models?
We
Or
just like to be together.
Yeah,
like our
we
dates.
just
Okay.
so
that's
week
really
would be,
important.
But the Saturdays always kind of helped. I mean, we always had really good times on our dates, and we'd bond and kind of gear up for the coming week that I would feel pretty.
Depleted and
Yeah.
worn out.
But as the kids got older, they became they were my absolute best friends, and it worked. I mean, it worked. I was packing things down. Whoops. But it worked.
When Leah Young talked about her time with Cody, there was sort of this like, if ever there was a difference in opinion about what should be done, especially if it had some sort of gospel or church element to it. And an example would be like, oh, should we go out to eat on Sunday? Or do we need to go to church on our vacation? Those sorts of things. If Cody Young came down and said, yep, she had to submit because the husband said it. Was there that sort of thing where
Yeah.
you guys might have had differences?
Yes, but it wasn't in a he was never like, that's just the way. He was always very mild and very kind, but I did always feel like he got the last word. Like I said, it wasn't because he was some tyrannical. He wasn't. It was just, I think I wanted the peace, and he knew. Again, he always had things figured out. So it was like, well, he's got it figured out. We'll just let him go with it.
So-
It's just makes sense.
Yeah, in some ways it's so counter to sensibilities in 2020, but in some ways it is efficient, right?
Yeah.
And so for you, do you think of those early mid years as like oppressive, or do you think of them as hard work but really fulfilling? Like, how do you living in the Mormon patriarchy with someone raised in a very conservative home? How do you reflect back now on how you were feeling then about it all? Were you quietly depressed? Were you loving it? Like what?
I think a little of both. I mean, I think I was a little bit. There were years that I think that were harder than others. I think for the most part, it it logically made sense, so I just made it okay. And then we'd have such, like I said, we'd have our dates and things would be great, and that would kind of keep me going for. And I mean, of course, any woman's going to feel a little bit of. I mean, when the kids got a little bit older, I started feeling it more because I felt like I didn't have this education background to help them and to. So, I mean, a little both, I guess, to answer your question.
Yeah. Okay, so so you guys are having a couple kids.
Mm-hmm.
Did you decide on only 2? Did you want more? Was that a
That
thing?
was one thing that I won on because he wanted more, but I just said, I know my personality and I know I can do 2 well. I don't know if I can do more than 2 well.
But you came from 5.
He came from
Yeah.
5, and
So
and he
how
wanted
did
more.
How did you capitulate on that? Like, for me, Margie wanted 2 or 3, and I'm like 4. And I won because patriarchy, right?
Yeah, that's
But-
true. That's the one thing that I definitely trumped on that. So
How'd you back down on that, Dave? Come on, where's your priesthood cojones?
Well,
I'm just
I
kidding.
don't know.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I was figuring I'd hear like a fertility story at some
yeah,
point. or
no,
something.
nope.
Okay.
It was just
that's what Keri wanted. I mean, we
he
talked
was-
about it
we
on
did, and
occasion, and she said that's where I'm at, and so
He never fought me on it. I mean, there was
That's
a few
interesting.
times that he was like, "Well, it'd be nice," and but he never pushed on that. I think he figured I was giving birth, so.
So we're about to bring Alyssa in. Any
Mm-hmm.
big events or church-related stuff or faith-related stuff, bumps, critical life events prior to having Alyssa kind of jump in with her side of the
I
story?
don't think so. Can you? I think.
Are you
it's
mostly in
pretty
Cache Valley
smooth.
this
We're
whole
in Cache
time?
Valley the whole time until we moved up when Alyssa was little, but yeah, up until then we stayed in Cache Valley.
Okay.
We were pretty
Yeah,
smooth.
she was
sailing.
born in Cache Valley, and then we left for a little while, and then went back.
Came back. Okay.
Yeah.
All
So,
right.
yeah, I think that's it.